I never thought a snowplow would turn me into the most hated man in my neighborhood, but here we are. The whole mess started in December 2025, right after I moved into my house on Maple Ridge Drive in Rochester, Minnesota. I had just bought the place in November, a nice 3-bedroom ranch with a 2-car garage that sat on a corner lot. The previous owner had been an older guy who apparently kept to himself, and I figured I would do the same. Work from home as a software consultant, shovel my driveway when needed, and live my life in peace. That lasted exactly 3 weeks. Minnesota winters are no joke. Anyone who has lived here knows that when it snows, it really snows. We are talking about feet of accumulation, not inches. The city plows the main roads, but the side streets and driveways are your own problem. Most people either shovel by hand, hire a service, or have a small snowblower. Me, I went big. I bought a professional-grade truck-mounted snowplow setup for my Ford F-250. Cost me nearly $8,000, but I figured it was worth it. I could clear my driveway in 5 minutes instead of spending an hour with a shovel in negative-degree weather. The first real snowstorm hit on December 18th. We got 14 inches overnight. I woke up at 6 in the morning, had my coffee, and went out to plow my driveway before my 9 o'clock meeting. The plow worked like a dream. I cleared my driveway and the sidewalk in front of my house, then did a quick pass on the part of the street directly in front of my property, since the city plow had left a massive berm of packed snow blocking everything. Done by 6:30, back inside, warm and ready for the day. That afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a woman in her mid-40s standing there with a clipboard and a smile that did not reach her eyes. She wore a puffy North Face jacket and had her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that looked like it was giving her a headache. "Hello. You must be the new neighbor. I am Patricia Winters, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood." She extended her hand and I shook it. "Owen Crawford, nice to meet you." "I noticed you have quite the impressive snow removal equipment," she said, glancing past me toward my truck in the driveway. "That is a serious plow you have got there." "Yeah, makes life easier," I said, wondering where this was going. Patricia smiled again, and this time it looked even more forced. "Well, Owen, I wanted to talk to you about community spirit and neighborly cooperation. We have quite a few elderly residents on our street and some folks who cannot afford professional snow removal services. I am sure you noticed how much snow we got last night." "I did. That is why I bought the plow." "Exactly. So I am sure you would be happy to help out your neighbors. We have a tradition here of people with equipment helping those less fortunate." I took the liberty of making a list of addresses that would need your assistance. She held up her clipboard, which had at least 20 addresses written on it. I blinked. "You want me to plow 20 driveways?" "Well, not just driveways. Some of them have rather long walkways too. Mrs. Henderson at 847 has that beautiful stone pathway that goes all the way to her backyard. And the Johnsons need their driveway and the area around their RV cleared so they can access it." "That would take me hours," I said slowly. "Oh, I am sure it would not be that bad. An hour, maybe 2. And think of how grateful everyone would be. It is the neighborly thing to do." Patricia tilted her head, still smiling. "I appreciate the thought, but I bought the plow for my own property. I work from home and do not really have time to plow the entire neighborhood." Her smile finally dropped. "I see. Well, that is disappointing. When you live in an HOA community, Owen, we expect a certain level of cooperation and community involvement. Your HOA dues help maintain our common areas and property values. I understand that, and I pay my dues. But nowhere in the HOA agreement I signed does it say I have to provide free snow removal services to my neighbors. Patricia's eyes narrowed. I will have to bring this up at our next board meeting. We may need to revisit our community guidelines regarding equipment sharing and neighborly obligations. You do that, I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. Have a good day, Patricia. I closed the door and went back to work, thinking that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few days, I got 3 more visits from HOA board members, each trying a different approach. First came Gary, the vice president, who tried the buddy-buddy routine, acting like we were old friends and surely I would want to help out. Then came Dorothy, the treasurer, who tried to make me feel guilty by telling me sob stories about elderly Mrs. Henderson who had fallen last year on her icy driveway and broken her hip. Finally, Linda, the secretary, just straight up asked if I thought I was better than everyone else. I gave them all the same answer. I was happy to be a good neighbor in reasonable ways, but I was not running a free snow removal service. If they wanted to hire me to plow driveways, we could talk rates. That suggestion went over like a lead balloon. The second major snowstorm hit on December 23rd. Another 12 inches overnight. I did my usual routine, cleared my property, and went back inside. Around 10 in the morning, I heard raised voices outside. I looked out my window and saw Patricia standing in the street with a small crowd of neighbors, all of them staring at my house. She was gesturing animatedly, and even through the closed windows, I could hear her voice carrying. I grabbed my coat and went outside. "Can I help you with something?" Patricia turned to me and her face was red either from cold or anger, maybe both. "Yes, Owen. We have been discussing your refusal to help your neighbors, and frankly, we have reached a consensus." The HOA board held an emergency meeting this morning, and we have decided to implement a new community guideline. Any resident with professional-grade snow removal equipment must make it available for community use during significant snow events. "You cannot mandate that I use my personal property for other people," I said, keeping my voice level. "Actually, we can. The HOA has broad authority to implement rules that serve the common good of the community. This is in everyone's best interest." An older man I recognized as Mr. Harper from 3 houses down spoke up. "Come on, son. It would not kill you to help out a little. Some of us cannot handle this much snow on our own." "I understand that, Mr. Harper, and I am sympathetic, but the solution is not to force me to do it for free. There are plenty of snow removal services in Rochester that you can hire. Those cost money." A woman I did not recognize shouted. "So did my $8,000 plow," I shot back. "Plus the truck modifications, the maintenance, the gas, and my time. Why should I absorb those costs for everyone else?" Patricia stepped forward, drawing herself up to her full height, which was maybe 5'4". "Because it is the right thing to do, Owen. Because we live in a community and communities take care of each other. Your selfish attitude is noted, and if you do not comply with the new guideline, we will have no choice but to issue fines." "Fines for what?" "Not volunteering my time and equipment. Fines for violating HOA community cooperation standards. $50 per day of non-compliance." I laughed. I could not help it. "You are going to fine me for not doing free labor. Good luck with that. I suggest you talk to a lawyer before you start issuing fines, Patricia, because that is not going to hold up." I went back inside, and for the next hour I watched through my window as the group dispersed, though Patricia stayed in the street for a while, talking on her phone and shooting angry glances at my house. That evening, I did my research. I pulled up the HOA bylaws and read through them cover to cover. There was nothing in there about equipment sharing or community service requirements. The HOA could set rules about things like lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, and noise levels, but they could not compel residents to provide free services. I also looked up Minnesota HOA law and confirmed that what Patricia was threatening was completely unenforceable. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, I found a formal notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, stating that I was in violation of the newly implemented community equipment sharing protocol and that I owed a $50 fine. With an additional $50 to be added each day, I remained in non-compliance. The notice also stated that continued refusal to cooperate could result in additional penalties, including liens against my property. That was when I got mad. I do not like being bullied, and I especially do not like being threatened with legal action over something completely bogus. I spent Christmas Day with my parents in St. Paul, but the whole time I was thinking about how to handle this situation. By the time I drove home that evening, I had a plan. The day after Christmas, I printed up a professional-looking flyer on my computer. It read, Crawford Snow Removal Services, professional snowplowing available for Maple Ridge residents, driveways, $75 per clearing, walkways, $25 per clearing, RV pads and extra areas, $50, seasonal contracts available at discounted rates, call or text Owen at. I included my phone number at the bottom. I made 50 copies and spent an hour walking around the neighborhood, putting them in mailboxes. If the HOA wanted me to provide snow removal services to the community, fine. I would provide them at market rate. The response was immediate and not what I expected. Within 2 hours, I got 12 angry text messages and 7 phone calls. Most of them were from HOA board members, but a few were from neighbors. The general theme was that I was a greedy, selfish person who was trying to profit off my neighbor's hardship. Patricia left me a voicemail that was so angry I saved it just in case I needed evidence later. She threatened me with harassment charges for putting flyers in mailboxes, which made me laugh since that is not even remotely illegal. But I also got 3 legitimate inquiries. Mr. Harper called and asked if I was serious about the $75 rate. I told him I was. He said his usual guy charged $60 but was booked solid for the season, and could I come do his driveway tomorrow morning? I said sure. An hour later, a woman named Sandra from 2 streets over called and hired me to do her driveway and walkway for $100. Then a younger couple, the Martins, called and asked about a seasonal contract. We negotiated a rate of $400 for the rest of the winter, which included unlimited plowing of their driveway. The next snowstorm came on December 30th. We got another 10 inches. I woke up early, did my own property first, then headed over to Mr. Harper's house. His driveway was one of those long, curved affairs that probably would have taken him 3 hours to shovel by hand. I had it done in 12 minutes. He came out with a check already written and thanked me profusely, saying his back could not handle that kind of work anymore. I did Sandra's property next, then the Martins. By 9 in the morning, I had cleared 4 properties and made $350. Not bad for 2 hours of work. That afternoon, I got a formal letter via email from the HOA. This one was longer and more official sounding. It stated that my snow removal flyers constituted unauthorized commercial activity within the neighborhood, which violated HOA covenants prohibiting home-based businesses that created traffic or disturbance. It demanded that I cease and desist immediately and pay a $200 fine for the violation. I called a lawyer. His name was Richard Stokes, and he specialized in HOA disputes. I explained the situation, forwarded him all the correspondence and notices, and asked if I had anything to worry about. Richard laughed when he finished reading everything. Owen, this is one of the most overreaching HOA situations I have seen in a while, and I have seen a lot. They have absolutely no legal standing to compel you to provide free services, and they cannot fine you for offering paid services unless your HOA covenants specifically prohibit commercial activity. Do they? I read the whole document. There is a section about not running businesses that create excessive traffic or noise, but it is clearly meant to prevent things like operating a mechanic shop out of your garage or running a daycare with 20 kids showing up every day. Exactly. Plowing a few driveways is not going to meet that threshold. You are not putting up business signage, you are not having customers come to your property, and you are not creating any disturbance. Here is what I recommend. Draft a response to the HOA explaining that you are not in violation of any legitimate covenant, that their attempted fines are unenforceable, and that if they continue to harass you, you will pursue legal action for abuse of authority. I can help you draft it if you want. Yes, please. We spent 30 minutes on the phone and Richard sent me a letter template. I filled it in, signed it, and emailed it to the HOA board that evening. The letter was polite but firm. It pointed out that they had no authority to compel free labor, that my small-scale snow removal services did not violate any legitimate HOA covenants, and that continued harassment could result in legal action, including a lawsuit for damages and attorney fees. For a few days, things were quiet. Then the next snowstorm hit on January 4th. This one was a monster, 18 inches of heavy, wet snow, the kind that breaks snowblowers and throws your back out if you try to shovel it. I spent the entire morning working. My own property, then Mr. Harper, then Sandra, then the Martins. By noon, I had 4 more calls from neighbors asking if I was available. I spent the whole afternoon plowing, and by the time I finished, I was exhausted but had made almost $900 for the day. That evening, Patricia showed up at my door again. This time, she was not alone. She had Gary, Dorothy, and Linda with her, the entire HOA board. They looked like a very angry mob. "We need to talk," Patricia said without preamble. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They filed into my living room and I gestured to the couch and chairs. Nobody sat down. "This has gone far enough," Patricia said. "You are tearing apart the community. People are upset. They feel like you are extorting them." Extorting them? I am offering a service at a fair price. Nobody has to hire me. You have equipment that could help people, and you are charging them money instead of being a decent neighbor. "Patricia, I spent $8,000 on a plow. I spend time and gas and effort to clear snow. Why on earth would I do that for free? Because it is the right thing to do." No, it is not. The right thing to do is to help when you can in ways that are reasonable. If Mr. Harper fell on his ice and needed help getting up, I would absolutely help him for free. If someone needed to borrow a cup of sugar, I would give it to them. But what you are asking is for me to donate hours of labor and thousands of dollars in equipment costs so that other people do not have to pay for snow removal services. That is not reasonable, and you know it. Gary spoke up. "Look, man, we get it. You made an investment. But this is creating division in the neighborhood. Half the people think you are a hero for offering affordable snow removal, and the other half think you are a jerk for not doing it for free. It is causing problems." Then maybe the HOA should stop telling people I am a jerk for not donating my labor. Dorothy crossed her arms. "We have not been saying anything that is not true. You refuse to help your neighbors." "I refuse to work for free. There is a difference." Linda, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "What if we found a compromise? What if the HOA paid you to plow certain driveways? We could use community funds to help the elderly residents who cannot afford it. I considered that. That is actually a reasonable suggestion. What did you have in mind? Patricia looked horrified. Absolutely not. We are not paying him for something he should be doing out of the goodness of his heart. Then we are done here, I said. I am happy to work with you if you want to hire me on behalf of residents who need help. Otherwise, I am going to keep doing exactly what I am doing. I am not violating any rules, I am not breaking any laws, and I am done being harassed about it. The four of them left, and Patricia was practically vibrating with anger. As they walked to their cars, I heard her say to the others, "This is not over." She was right. 2 days later, I got a notice that the HOA was implementing a new rule, effective immediately. Any vehicle with a plow attachment had to park in the owner's garage and could not be visible from the street. Violation would result in a $100 fine per day. The problem was my truck would not fit in my garage with the plow attached. The plow added about 18 inches to the front of the vehicle, and my garage was not deep enough to accommodate it. I would have to detach the plow every single time I parked, which took about 20 minutes, and then reattach it every time I wanted to use it, another 20 minutes. It was clearly designed to make using the plow as inconvenient as possible. I called Richard again. He said it was a gray area. HOAs could implement rules about vehicle storage, and if they had a legitimate aesthetic concern about vehicles with commercial equipment being parked in driveways, they might have some standing. But the timing was suspicious, and if I could prove it was retaliatory, we could fight it. How do I prove it is retaliatory? I asked. You have got all the correspondence showing the HOA's anger about your snow removal business. You have got the timeline showing this rule was implemented right after your conflict with them. That is pretty good evidence. But here is the thing, Owen. Fighting this could get expensive. Legal fees, time, stress. You need to decide if it is worth it. I thought about it. I was making decent money from the snow removal, but it was not a full-time business or anything. On the other hand, I really hated being pushed around by petty tyrants. Let me try something else first, I said. I went to the next HOA board meeting, which was held at the community center on January 8th. About 30 residents showed up, which was apparently a much bigger turnout than usual. I signed up for the public comment period. When my turn came, I stood up and addressed the room. Hi, I am Owen Crawford from 923 Maple Ridge Drive. I am here to talk about the recent conflict regarding snow removal. I want to be clear about a few things. First, I bought my snowplow with my own money for my own use. Second, when the HOA demanded I provide free snow removal services to the neighborhood, I declined because I do not think it is reasonable to expect someone to donate expensive equipment and hours of labor for free. Third, when I offered to provide those services for a fair price, I was accused of extortion and greed. Finally, the HOA has implemented what I believe is a retaliatory rule designed to make it difficult for me to use my own property. There were murmurs in the crowd, some agreeing and some disagreeing. I continued, I am not trying to cause problems. I am happy to help my neighbors in reasonable ways, but I also think I have the right to set boundaries on my time and property. If the HOA wants to hire me to help elderly or disabled residents, I would be willing to offer a discounted rate, but I am not going to be bullied into free labor. Patricia stood up. This is not about bullying. This is about community values. When I moved to this neighborhood 20 years ago, people helped each other. We did not nickel and dime our neighbors. An older man I did not recognize spoke up from the back. Patricia, 20 years ago, a professional snowplow cost $2,000, not $8,000. And gas was $1.50 a gallon, not $3.50. Times have changed. Another woman said, I hired Owen to do my driveway. He did a great job and his rate was cheaper than any other service I called. I do not see what the problem is. Mr. Harper stood up. I have known Patricia for 15 years, and she has never once offered to shovel my driveway for free. But she expects this young man to do it because he has equipment. That does not make sense. The meeting devolved into arguing. About half the room seemed to side with me, and the other half agreed with Patricia. The board eventually called for order and said they would table the discussion for a future meeting. After the meeting, several people came up to me. Some thanked me for speaking up. Others hired me on the spot for snow removal. One guy named Jeff even said he was thinking about buying a plow himself and going into business with me, though I politely declined the partnership offer. But Patricia cornered me in the parking lot as I was leaving. You think you are so smart, she said, but you are just a selfish millennial who does not understand what community means. I am 34, Patricia, and I understand community just fine. What I do not understand is why you think you can bully people into doing what you want. I am not bullying anyone. I am trying to maintain the values that make this neighborhood great. By implementing retaliatory rules and threatening illegal fines. Yeah, that is really great. She stepped closer, and for a moment I thought she might actually try to physically intimidate me. Watch yourself, Owen. You have made an enemy of the wrong person. I left and spent the drive home wondering what she meant by that. I found out 3 days later. I came home from a meeting with a client in downtown Rochester to find a notice taped to my door. It was from the City Code Enforcement Office. According to the notice, a complaint had been filed claiming I was running an unlicensed commercial snow removal business out of my residence without the proper permits and insurance. I was ordered to cease operations immediately until I could provide proof of licensing or face fines and potential criminal charges. I called the Code Enforcement Office and spoke to an inspector named Tom Bradley. He explained that in Rochester, if you are operating a commercial snow removal business, you need a business license, commercial liability insurance, and depending on the scale of your operation, potentially other permits. How many clients do you have? Tom asked. Maybe 10 regular ones and a few one-time jobs. And how much are you making? I do not know, maybe a few $1,000s for the season so far. Tom sighed. Look, here is the thing. Technically, if you are making money providing a service, you should have a business license. It is not expensive, maybe $150. And you should have liability insurance in case you accidentally damage someone's property while plowing. But between you and me, this sounds like someone is using code enforcement to settle a personal grudge. We do not usually go after small-scale stuff like this. It was my HOA president, I said. We have been in a dispute about this for weeks. Yeah, I figured it was something like that. Tell you what, if you want to keep doing this, get the license and the insurance. Then you are fully legit and nobody can complain. If you do not want to deal with it, just stop taking money for plowing and do it as a favor, and there is nothing we can enforce. How long do I have? I will give you 30 days to get your paperwork in order. Fair enough. Yeah, thanks, Tom. I spent the next week setting up a legitimate business. I registered Crawford Snow Removal Services with the city, got a business license, and bought a commercial liability insurance policy. The total cost was about $800 between registration, insurance, and the lawyer fees for Richard to look over everything. But now I was completely, totally legit. Nobody could say I was operating illegally. I sent a copy of all my paperwork to the Code Enforcement Office, the HOA board, and just to be petty, I had Richard send it via certified mail so they had to sign for it. The snow kept falling. January in Minnesota is brutal, and we had storm after storm. My little business was actually doing pretty well. I had 15 regular clients now, and I was making between $500 and $1,000 per storm, depending on how many one-time jobs I picked up. It was not enough to quit my day job, but it was nice extra income. Patricia and the HOA board went silent for a couple of weeks, which made me nervous. In my experience, silence from an angry HOA president is not a good sign. On January 22nd, I got an email from the HOA attorney. It was a formal cease and desist letter claiming that my snow removal business violated multiple HOA covenants. The letter cited increased traffic in the neighborhood, commercial activity in a residential zone, and creating a nuisance for other residents. It demanded I shut down the business immediately or face legal action, including a potential lawsuit and liens against my property. I forwarded it to Richard. He called me 30 minutes later and he sounded amused. "Owen, this is garbage. They are throwing everything at the wall hoping something sticks. You do not have increased traffic because you go to other people's properties, not the other way around. Commercial activity is allowed unless it creates a substantial disturbance, which plowing snow obviously does not. And nuisance is completely undefined. They have got nothing. So what do? I am going to draft a response explaining that their claims are baseless and that if they pursue legal action, you will countersue for harassment and abuse of process. And I think we should also send them a bill for your legal fees so far since this is clearly retaliatory harassment. Can we do that? Probably will not get paid, but it makes a point." Richard sent a beautifully written letter that basically told the HOA to pound sand. He outlined every reason their claims were nonsense and warned them that continued harassment could result in a lawsuit that would cost them a lot more than any fines they were trying to levy against me. 2 days later, Patricia called me directly. "Owen, we need to settle this. I am listening. The board has discussed it, and we are willing to drop all fines and complaints if you agree to plow the driveways of our 5 oldest residents for free for the rest of the season." I almost laughed. "Patricia, that is not a compromise. That is you getting exactly what you wanted from the beginning. It is 5 driveways, Owen, a couple of hours of work per storm. Surely you can spare that for the good of the community. Here is my counter-offer. I will plow those 5 driveways at a 50% discount. The HOA can pay me out of community funds. That way the residents get help, I get fairly compensated, and nobody can complain about commercial activity since the HOA is hiring me." There was a long silence. "That is not what we had in mind. Patricia, I have been more than reasonable. I have tried to compromise. But you have filed false complaints, threatened illegal fines, and wasted both of our time and money on legal fees. I am done negotiating. Either accept my offer or leave me alone. You are going to regret this," she said and hung up. That night, I went out to my truck to grab something and found that all 4 tires had been slashed. The plow itself had been spray painted with obscenities. I immediately called the police. 2 officers showed up, and I filed a report. I explained the ongoing dispute with the HOA and said I suspected it was related, though I had no proof. They took photos, dusted for prints, and said they would investigate. One of the officers, a younger guy named Officer Martinez, said he had heard about my situation from a buddy who lived in the neighborhood. "Sounds like your HOA is pretty worked up," he said. "That is an understatement. Look, I cannot tell you what to do, but you might want to get some security cameras. If this is related to your dispute, it probably will not be the last incident." I took his advice. The next day, I installed a full security camera system with 4 cameras covering my driveway, front door, and both sides of my house. I also got my truck towed to a shop for new tires and to get the plow repainted. Total cost, $3,000. Richard suggested I send the bill to the HOA with a letter explaining that if the vandalism was related to their harassment campaign, they could be held liable for damages. We did not expect them to pay, but it was another piece of evidence for the pattern of behavior. A week went by with no leads on the vandalism. The police said there were no prints and no witnesses. I suspected it was someone connected to Patricia, but suspicion was not proof. On February 1st, we got another massive snowstorm, 16 inches. I rented a truck and plow attachment from a local equipment company while mine was being repaired, and I spent the day clearing my clients' properties. I made over $1,000. That evening, Patricia showed up at my door with a man I had never seen before. He was in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. "Owen, this is Charles Montgomery, the HOA attorney," Patricia said. "He would like to speak with you." I let them in, though I immediately texted Richard to let him know what was happening. Charles sat down in my living room and opened his briefcase. "Mr. Crawford, I am here to inform you that the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association is filing a lawsuit against you for breach of covenant, harassment of board members, and creating a hostile environment within the community." I kept my face neutral. "On what grounds?" "Your persistent refusal to comply with HOA directives, your commercial activity in violation of community standards, and your public statements at the board meeting which were defamatory toward Mrs. Winters." I did not say anything defamatory. I stated facts about the dispute. "You implied that Mrs. Winters was engaging in bullying and harassment, which is defamatory." "It is only defamatory if it is false. I have documentation of everything." Charles smiled thinly. "Regardless, the lawsuit is being filed. You will be served with papers within the next few days. I strongly suggest you retain legal counsel." "I already have an attorney." "Good. Then I will see you in court." Charles stood up, and he and Patricia left. I called Richard immediately and told him what happened. He sounded more serious this time. "Okay, so they are actually going through with it. That is bold. Most HOAs back down when they realize they are in the wrong because lawsuits are expensive and bad publicity. But if they want to play hardball, we can do that." "What are my chances?" "Honestly, pretty good. They have no legitimate legal claim. But here is the thing: lawsuits are expensive and time-consuming. Even if you win, you are looking at months of legal fees, depositions, court appearances. It is going to be a pain." "Can we countersue?" "Absolutely. For abuse of process, harassment, defamation if they have made false statements, and any actual damages like your vandalism costs. Let us do it." Over the next 2 weeks, I was served with lawsuit papers. The HOA's complaint was 30 pages long and full of legal jargon, but it boiled down to the same nonsense they had been claiming all along. I ran a business in violation of covenants. I created a nuisance. I defamed Patricia, and I caused division in the community. Richard filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that it was frivolous and without merit. He also filed a countersuit on my behalf, claiming harassment, abuse of process, and seeking damages for the vandalism, legal fees, and emotional distress. The case was assigned to a judge named Margaret Riley. The first hearing was set for March 5th. In the meantime, the neighborhood was pretty much split down the middle. About half the residents supported me, and many of them showed up to the next HOA board meeting to voice their displeasure with the lawsuit. The other half supported Patricia and the board, claiming I was destroying the community spirit. Mr. Harper, who I had become friendly with, told me that Patricia was telling people I was a dangerous troublemaker who was going to bring down their property values. She was apparently campaigning to get more support for the lawsuit and soliciting donations from residents to cover the legal fees. The more I learned about Patricia, the more I realized she was someone who needed control. She had been HOA president for 8 years, and according to Mr. Harper, she ran the board like a dictator. People who disagreed with her were frozen out or harassed until they either fell in line or moved away. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, I was working in my home office when I saw movement on my security camera. Someone was walking up my driveway. I switched to the live view and saw it was a woman I did not recognize, carrying a large envelope. She stuffed it in my mailbox and walked away quickly. I went outside and retrieved the envelope. Inside was a printed letter with no signature. It read, "You have brought negativity and conflict to our peaceful neighborhood. Your greed and selfishness have divided neighbors who used to be friends. You should be ashamed of yourself. The best thing you could do is sell your house and leave before you cause any more damage." It was clearly meant to intimidate me, but at this point, I was more angry than scared. I scanned the letter and sent it to Richard, along with the security footage of the woman delivering it. Richard said it was not illegal since it did not contain any direct threats, but it was more evidence of harassment. The court date arrived. Richard and I showed up at the Olmsted County Courthouse in Rochester at 9 in the morning. Patricia was there with Charles Montgomery and the rest of the HOA board. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom like we were at a wedding. Judge Riley was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s. She reviewed the filings, listened to opening statements from both attorneys, and then started asking questions. "Mr. Montgomery, help me understand the basis of your claim. You are arguing that Mr. Crawford's snow removal business violates HOA covenants. Which specific covenant?" Charles stood up. "Your Honor, the covenant regarding commercial activity in residential areas. Section 12, subsection 3 prohibits businesses that create traffic, noise, or disturbance. And how has Mr. Crawford's business created any of those things?" His clients come to his residence to pay him and discuss services. I leaned over to Richard and whispered, "That is a lie. Nobody comes to my house." Richard stood up. "Your Honor, that is factually incorrect. Mr. Crawford goes to his clients' properties. No clients come to his residence." "We can provide testimony from his clients to confirm this." Judge Riley looked at Charles. "Do you have any evidence of clients coming to his residence? We have reports from residents who have seen unfamiliar vehicles in the neighborhood." "That is not evidence, Mr. Montgomery. People are allowed to have visitors. Is there anything else?" Charles looked flustered. "The business itself is a nuisance, Your Honor. It has created conflict and division in the neighborhood. Conflict and division are not legal grounds for a lawsuit unless you can show actual harm. Has Mr. Crawford damaged property, threatened anyone, violated any laws? He has defamed my client, Mrs. Winters, by making false statements about her." "What statements?" He claimed she was harassing him and abusing her authority as HOA president. Judge Riley turned to Richard. "Counselor." Richard smiled. "Your Honor, truth is an absolute defense to defamation. We have extensive documentation showing that Mrs. Winters and the HOA board have engaged in repeated harassment of Mr. Crawford, including threatening illegal fines, filing false code enforcement complaints, implementing retaliatory rules, and pursuing this meritless lawsuit. We are prepared to present all of that evidence." Judge Riley nodded. "I have reviewed the filings, and frankly, Mr. Montgomery, this lawsuit appears to be completely without merit. Mr. Crawford has the right to operate a legal business, and the HOA has not demonstrated any legitimate violation of covenants or any actual harm. I am inclined to grant the motion to dismiss. Charles tried to argue, but Judge Riley cut him off. I have made my decision. The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am awarding Mr. Crawford attorney fees and costs. The HOA will be responsible for paying his legal expenses. Patricia stood up in the gallery. That is not fair. He is destroying our community. Mrs. Winters, sit down, Judge Riley said sharply. You and your board pursued a lawsuit that had no legal basis. That is an abusive process, and you are lucky I am not sanctioning you further. If Mr. Crawford wishes to pursue his countersuit, that is his right. We left the courtroom, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Richard shook my hand. That went about as well as it could have gone. The judge was clearly annoyed that they wasted the court's time. What happens now? They will have to pay your legal fees, which are going to be substantial, probably around $15,000. And if you want to pursue the countersuit for harassment and damages, we can do that. It is up to you. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to make Patricia and the board pay for everything they had put me through. But another part of me just wanted to move on with my life. Let me think about it, I said. Over the next few days, word spread through the neighborhood about the court decision. My supporters were thrilled, and several of them left congratulatory notes in my mailbox. My detractors were angry, and I got a few more nasty letters. But the most interesting development came a week after the court hearing. I got a call from a woman named Susan Peterson who lived 2 streets over. Owen, I hope you do not mind me calling. I got your number from Mr. Harper. I wanted to talk to you about what has been happening with Patricia and the HOA. Okay, what is on your mind? I think you should know that Patricia has been misusing HOA funds. I was on the board 2 years ago, and I raised concerns about some of her spending, and she pushed me out. But I kept copies of financial documents. I think she has been using community money for personal expenses. That is a serious accusation. I know. And I have been afraid to come forward because Patricia is vindictive. But after seeing how she has treated you, I think someone needs to stop her. Would you be willing to look at the documents? Yes, absolutely. Susan and I met at a coffee shop in downtown Rochester the next day. She brought a folder full of bank statements, receipts, and spreadsheets. As I looked through them, a clear pattern emerged. Over the past 4 years, Patricia had been writing checks from the HOA account for things like spa visits, shopping trips, and even a vacation to Florida, all labeled as community business expenses or HOA conference travel. This is fraud, I said. I know. I reported it to the other board members, but they are all Patricia's friends. They said I was mistaken and that everything was legitimate. How much money are we talking about? Susan pulled out a spreadsheet. Based on what I could find, at least $40,000 over 4 years. I sat back in my chair. Susan, this is way bigger than my snow removal dispute. This is criminal. I know. What should we do? I called Richard and explained the situation. He said that if the documents showed clear evidence of embezzlement, it should be reported to the police. He also said that, as a member of the HOA, Susan had the right to request a full financial audit. Susan and I went to the Rochester Police Department and filed a report. We met with a detective named Sarah Wu, who specialized in financial crimes. She reviewed the documents and agreed that there was enough evidence to open an investigation. This is going to take some time, Detective Wu said. We will need to subpoena bank records, interview witnesses, and build a case. But from what I am seeing here, there is definitely probable cause to investigate. Over the next month, the police investigation moved forward. Detective Wu interviewed board members, requested financial records from the HOA's bank, and spoke with vendors who had supposedly been paid for community services, but had no record of working for the HOA. In the meantime, the snow season was winding down. March in Minnesota can still get snow, but the big storms were mostly over. I had made about $12,000 from my snow removal business, which was way more than I expected. After paying for my equipment repairs, business license, insurance, and legal fees, I still came out ahead. On March 20th, Patricia was arrested at her home. The charges were embezzlement, fraud, and theft by swindle. According to the police report, she had stolen over $46,000 from the HOA over a 4-year period. The other board members claimed they had no knowledge of her activities, though Detective Wu said the investigation was ongoing. The neighborhood was in shock. Some people refused to believe Patricia could do such a thing. Others said they had suspected something was wrong for years, but had been too afraid to speak up. An emergency HOA meeting was called to elect a new board. Mr. Harper was elected president, and Susan was elected treasurer. One of the first things they did was commission a full financial audit and implement new oversight procedures to prevent future fraud. I attended the meeting, and when public comment came around, I stood up and addressed the room. I know the past few months have been difficult for this community. The dispute over my snow removal business turned into something much bigger than any of us expected. But I want to say that I do not regret standing up for myself. Nobody should be bullied into giving away their time, property, or labor for free. And nobody should be afraid to question authority when something does not seem right. I am glad the truth came out about Patricia, and I hope we can all move forward and build a better community together. There was applause from about half the room. The other half sat in silence, but at least nobody shouted at me. After the meeting, several people came up to apologize for how they had treated me. One woman admitted she had written one of the nasty letters because Patricia had told her I was trying to profit off elderly people. When she learned the truth, she felt terrible. Mr. Harper shook my hand. "You did a good thing, Owen. Patricia ran this place like her own personal kingdom. It was about time someone stood up to her." In April, I received a check from the HOA for $15,700, covering my legal fees as ordered by the court. I also got a formal apology letter from the new board, acknowledging that I had been unfairly targeted and harassed. Patricia's criminal case moved through the court system. In June, she pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her husband, who had stayed silent through the whole thing, quietly divorced her and moved out of the neighborhood. As for me, I decided to keep running my snow removal business. I did not make a ton of money, but it was satisfying work, and my clients appreciated the service. I also joined the HOA board as a regular member, not an officer, just to keep an eye on things and make sure the new leadership stayed accountable. The next winter, when the first big snowstorm hit in December 2026, I was out at 6 in the morning plowing my driveway. Mr. Harper called me an hour later asking if I could do his driveway. Then Sandra called. Then the Martins. By the end of the day, I had 15 jobs lined up. This time, nobody complained. Nobody accused me of being greedy or destroying the community. A few people even thanked me for providing an affordable alternative to the big snow removal companies. I learned a lot from that whole experience. I learned that standing up for yourself is worth it, even when it is hard. I learned that bullies often back down when you refuse to be intimidated. And I learned that sometimes, when you shine a light on one problem, you end up exposing much bigger problems that needed to be addressed. My neighborhood is not perfect. There are still disagreements and conflicts, as there are in any community. But we have better leadership now, more transparency, and a culture where people feel like they can speak up without being punished. And as for my snowplow, it is still parked in my driveway, ready to go whenever the next storm hits. The HOA never did pass that rule requiring me to keep it in the garage. Funny how things work out sometimes. I still live at 923 Maple Ridge Drive. I still work from home as a software consultant. I still plow driveways in the winter for extra money. And I am still happy. I bought that $8,000 snowplow because it taught me something important. Your time, your property, and your labor have value. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. The whole saga became something of a legend in Rochester HOA circles. Richard told me he had used my case as an example in several other HOA disputes, always with good results. Apparently, HOA boards think twice about overreaching when they hear about what happened to Patricia and the Maple Ridge board. I also reconnected with some neighbors I had not really talked to before. Jeff, the guy who had joked about going into business with me, actually did buy his own plow and started a competing snow removal service. But instead of seeing him as competition, we worked together. When one of us was too busy, we would refer clients to each other. It worked out well. Susan became a good friend. She told me that standing up to Patricia after all these years felt like lifting a burden she had carried for too long. She had been afraid of retaliation, afraid of being ostracized, afraid of making waves. But seeing me fight back gave her courage to come forward with what she knew. "You know what the craziest part is?" Susan said to me one evening over coffee. "Patricia could have just left you alone." If she had not made this her personal crusade, none of this would have come out. She would have kept stealing money, kept running the board like a dictator, and nobody would have known. But she could not stand the idea of someone not doing what she wanted. "That is usually how it works," I said. "People who abuse power cannot help themselves. They keep pushing until they push too far." The restitution payments from Patricia came slowly. Her assets were seized, including her house, and the money was returned to the HOA over a period of months. The new board used the funds to make actual improvements to the community. Things like repaving the roads, upgrading the playground equipment at the community center, and establishing an emergency fund for residents who needed help with things like snow removal. In fact, the new board implemented a program where the HOA would subsidize snow removal for elderly or disabled residents who could not afford it. They contracted with me and Jeff to provide the services at a discounted rate, and the HOA covered half the cost. It was exactly the kind of compromise I had suggested to Patricia months earlier, but she had been too stubborn and vindictive to consider it. By the time spring 2027 rolled around, life in Maple Ridge was actually pretty pleasant. The toxic atmosphere that had hung over the neighborhood during Patricia's reign was gone. People were friendlier, more willing to help each other out, and more involved in community decisions. I never did pursue my countersuit against the HOA. Once Patricia was arrested and the new board took over, there did not seem to be much point. I had gotten my legal fees paid, I had my business, and I had helped expose a criminal. That felt like enough. Looking back on the whole experience, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had just caved to Patricia's initial demand. If I had agreed to plow those driveways for free, would anyone have ever discovered her embezzlement? Would she have continued stealing from the community for years? Would other residents have continued to be bullied and intimidated? I like to think that standing up to her, refusing to back down, created a ripple effect that made the neighborhood better. But honestly, I did not do it to be a hero. I did it because I was tired of being pushed around, and I knew I was in the right. The final irony is that the whole dispute made me closer to my neighbors than I probably would have been otherwise. Mr. Harper and I became friends. Susan and I stayed in touch. Even some of the people who initially sided with Patricia eventually came around and apologized. Shared adversity has a way of bringing people together. As I sit here in my living room, looking out at the snow-covered street, I feel grateful for how things turned out. I have a home I love, neighbors I respect, and a small business that brings in extra income and helps people who need it. I stood up for myself when it mattered, and I helped expose corruption that was hurting my community. And I have one hell of a story to tell at parties. People always ask me if I regret buying that expensive snowplow, if I think all the hassle was worth it. My answer is always the same: absolutely. That $8,000 investment taught me more about standing up for myself, about community, about justice, than anything else I have experienced. It was worth every penny, every hour of legal meetings, every moment of stress, because at the end of the day, it was never really about the snowplow. It was about the principle. It was about not letting someone else dictate how you use your property, your time, your life. It was about drawing boundaries and enforcing them, even when people try to make you feel guilty for doing so. The snow is falling again tonight. Another storm is forecast for tomorrow, maybe 6 to 8 inches. I will be up early, coffee in hand, ready to clear my driveway and then head out to my clients' houses. It is good work, honest work, and I am proud of it. And somewhere, in a minimum security prison about 100 miles from here, Patricia Winters is probably thinking about the snowplow that destroyed her little empire. I hope she has learned something from the experience, though I doubt it. People like her rarely do. But that is not my problem anymore. I have moved on. I have built a good life here in Rochester, in this neighborhood that once seemed so hostile but turned out to be full of good people who just needed someone to stand up and say enough. The snowplow sits in my driveway, ready for tomorrow's storm. It is more than just a piece of equipment now. It is a reminder that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing. That standing your ground matters. That bullies lose when you refuse to be intimidated. And it is a reminder that community is not about blindly doing what you are told. It is about mutual respect, fair treatment, and standing up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. I would not change a thing.